My husband didn't think twice before he took revenge on me because I cheated on him with his best childhood friend. I know what I did was wrong and I take full responsibility for it. My husband's anger was justified because he had every right to be angry with me. Even if I wanted to cheat, it shouldn't have been with my husband's best childhood friend. He hit me right where it hurts. Due to my foolish mistake, I ended up losing my marriage and managed to split two friends that had been together before I even came into the picture. Well, his friend also managed to destroy my marriage. I'm not trying to blame anyone. I fully take responsibility for my actions. I wish I could turn back the hands of time and rewrite everything that went wrong. But I guess there's nothing I can really do now. I know you all would judge me after listening to this, but I hope you all would learn something from this. Hi, my name is Cherry and I am 26 years old. The name of my husband is Chris. He is a 31-year-old businessman. My husband and I have been married for 4 years now. Chris and I have known each other ever since we met at an annual event in New York. We became close and started dating for months. Chris and I went on dates, outings, and I was even introduced to his friends and family. Chris was very close to his mother and was very fond of his best friend. Honestly speaking, Chris and his best friend were practically brothers because of how close they were. The name of my husband's best friend is Matthew. They grew up together, went to the same school, and are similar in character. Among my husband's childhood friends, Matthew was his favorite then. I became really close to Chris's friends and family not quite long after we started dating. We dated for a few months before we finally got married to each other. When we were dating, Chris brought me lots of gifts, took care of me, and oftentimes was always there for me. After 4 months of dating and getting to know each other's family and friends, Chris and I decided to tie the knot together. We had a simple but lovely wedding and both of our families and friends came to rejoice with us. I felt safe because I was loved by many, most especially from Chris' family. I never thought I would be loved the way I was. The first few months of our marriage was blissful. We carried on with how we used to do when we were still dating. Chris often took me out and made sure I was comfortable. Before I met my husband, I was working at a sales department store. I often had a hectic work schedule, so Chris and I decided that I would take care of the house while he fends for the both of us. We also decided not to have kids after getting married until we were both ready. Frankly speaking, I wasn't even ready to have any child at that time because I wasn't emotionally ready to take care of a child. I wanted to enjoy my marriage and also to get close to my husband more. The thought of being left alone in the house with an infant and also doing house chores scared me a lot. We made that decision before Chris and I got married. I wanted to clarify him on that so it won't be an issue when we finally tied the knot. My husband agreed and also saw reasons with me. So guys, months went by and before you know it, my husband and I had our first wedding anniversary together. Everything went well and we had an anniversary dinner together. We exchanged gifts and professed our love to each other. Well, Chris and I were living happily together until I was getting tired of everything. My new daily schedule was based on repetition, which irritated me. I was used to dressing and leaving the house and not staying at home and only cleaning and cooking alone. That life isn't for me. I never knew it would turn out that way, if not I wouldn't have agreed to it. I wanted to work and not be idle. I tried discussing it with my husband and he asked me if I was in any way lacking anything at the house. He told me not to bother myself to look for a job, that he would work hard to fend for us. If I had listened then, I wouldn't have ended up like this. My desperation of wanting to have a job cost me my marriage. I regretted everything. So guys, I got tired of being a full-time housewife. I needed to go out to work. All efforts to convince my husband to let me go to work failed. I didn't plan on having an affair with anyone, at least not with my husband's best friend Matthew. I was only tired of my daily routine and wanted to change it. On the other hand, Matthew is a 31-year-old businessman. Matthew and my husband were really close before everything was messed up. I only got to know Matthew through my husband Chris. One of the things I liked about my husband was that he didn't share anything about his marital life with his best friend even though they were best of friends. Matthew always came to the house anytime he felt like coming. His constant coming was beginning to get on my nerves. I tried talking to my husband about it, but then again I didn't want to come between them. Matthew is very good looking and the type that every lady would want to be his girlfriend. He was that charming. I never liked the idea of being alone with Matthew because he is the type that likes flirting with ladies at any given opportunity. Sometimes, I wondered how Chris managed to grow up with someone like Matthew. My husband was a different version of his best friend Matthew. Chris often told Matthew to stop his reckless behavior and settle down. But Matthew never listened. Matthew never really gave Chris and I space ever since we celebrated our wedding anniversary. He was constantly coming in and out of the house. There were times Matthew would spend the night at home before he leaves the following day. He was practically living with us then. This sudden behavior made me restless and I tried talking about it with my husband. But my husband thought I was trying to come in between him and his best friend. I had my reasons for not having Matthew around at that time. There were times Matthew literally made advances towards me even when my husband was at home. Those were one of the ways Matthew was behaving towards me. I didn't want to tell my husband because he wouldn't believe me. He would think maybe I am making up stories to split them apart. My husband went on business trips, leaving me all at home. Matthew used this to his own advantage and constantly came over to the house. Due to how my husband trusted his best friend, he would tell him to keep an eye on me anytime he was out of town. He never knew that his friend also had other motives for coming to his house, and I was foolish enough to fall right into his trap. I am very ashamed of myself even as I write this. It makes no sense that I cheated on my husband with Matthew, his childhood friend. It's even crazy that his best friend was my affair partner. Matthew got me and I take full responsibility because I'm an adult and can make decisions for myself. Due to my husband's constant business trips, we didn't spend much time together. This happened immediately when Chris was given a different position at his workplace. My husband was in charge of meeting up with clients' demands and making them satisfied. His job required him to travel a lot. So, he was always busy and mostly not at home. One day, Chris and I had a back and forth argument after he told me about how unclean the house had been and my nonchalant attitude towards it. I was very irritated by those words and I angrily told him to get a maid if he always wanted the house to be cleaned. That made him furious and he walked out on me. I kept asking myself if that was his plan all along. Trapping me into marrying him and caging me at home just doing nothing. I told myself that I should have given it a big thought before agreeing to marry him. I never knew that being a full-time housewife would have a big toll on me. At that point, I was gradually losing my mind. I wasn't made for that kind of lifestyle. So guys, after that argument that we had, Chris didn't come back home until later that night. He met me on the chair in the living room watching my favorite night movie. Of course I was mad at him for how he behaved during the day. He walked up to me and told me that we needed to talk. I wanted to decline at first, but I gave him that respect and so I stayed. Chris told me to take a break from doing house chores for the time being. He suggested that I take a vacation with my friends so it would enable me to clear my head and also light up my mood. He noticed how I was behaving and how I was reacting to things. I agreed to it because I also wanted to avoid losing my mind at that time. 2 days later, my husband arranged a trip for me and my friends to hang out together. I packed my bags and everything I needed for that trip. It was time to go and my husband walked me to the car. I told him I would send him lots of pictures and asked him to take care of the house while I was away. We joked around before telling each other goodbye. I was very excited about the trip because I needed it. My friends and I were out of town and we had fun. We went to see different interesting places and took a lot of pictures. I fulfilled my promise by sending my husband some of the pictures we took. He liked them and even told me to take more and make sure I enjoy myself. Of course, I did enjoy the trip. If there was anybody that had fun to the fullest on that trip, it was definitely me. Few days after we were out of town, my husband wasn't picking up my calls like he used to. He was the one calling me throughout the first 2 days that we arrived at our destination. I got very disturbed about it and I told my friends my concerns. They noticed how uneasy I was too and asked what was wrong. After I explained everything to them, they told me not to worry and that maybe he was caught up with work and didn't have time. I agreed because Chris had a hectic work schedule, but I was not fully convinced that it was because of work that he hadn't called me. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind and I began to think that my husband was cheating on me with another lady. I began to suspect that he had tricked me into going on vacation so he could bring in another woman. I thought to myself and asked myself different questions. The trip was meant to last for another week, but I cut it short. Yes, guys, I shortened the trip to 3 days. My friends were angry with me for cutting short the trip and they told me that I was unnecessarily overthinking things. I ignored all they said to me and told them to start packing their bags. They stopped complaining and began packing that same day. We left the very next day. I was very desperate because I wanted to see if Chris tricked me into leaving the house so he could have his fun. It had been 2 days and I still didn't hear from him. He hadn't been picking up my calls and that made me worried, guys. So guys, we got home and I didn't meet my husband at home. I was surprised because I thought he would be at home. I got very worried and began calling him, but it wasn't reachable at that time. I had the thought that he probably switched off his phone at some point because I was constantly calling him. While I was busy lamenting to myself, Matthew walked in just like that without knocking. I got very angry because it was something he always did. He always came in and out of our home anytime he liked. When Matthew saw me, he was surprised and he asked me why I was home and what the trip meant for 5 days. "What are you doing here? Are you not supposed to be clearing your head?" Those were his exact words. I stared at him and paid no attention to what he was saying because obviously he was trying to mock me. He saw how uneasy I was and he asked if everything was okay. I told him I did not need his help at first, but I got too worried and I thought I could trust him, so I explained everything to him and told him the reason why my trip was cut short. Matthew's response at that time made matters worse. He told me that I was right to feel the way I was feeling and that I should follow whatever my heart told me at that moment. He got the best of me because I was in my feelings, so I gave in to his ideas. I asked Matthew where Chris was and he didn't give me a reasonable answer. He just told me he went out for work. After a few minutes of talking with Matthew, he said he needed to attend to something and he left. I waited for my husband throughout that day and I was unable to reach out to him. That night, I gave a thought to what Matthew said and thought that maybe my instincts were right about Chris. The following morning, Chris returned and I decided to confront him about his whereabouts for the past few days and why he had been ignoring my calls and not responding to my messages. Chris said that he had been busy with work ever since I left for my vacation and that he was at a place where he couldn't reach his phone and at some point, his phone battery had died. I didn't believe him because of the way he said it nonchalantly, and at this point, I was gradually beginning to think that Chris was cheating on me and he was using his work to cover it. I wanted to press further, but he told me he was tired. My husband didn't ask about my trip or even care to know if everything was okay. At that period, I kept thinking about what my mind was telling me about Chris and kept asking myself if my husband was really cheating on me. I decided to let it go for some time since Chris had just returned and he was tired. Matthew didn't stop coming to our house and he was building on my suspicions daily. He fed me with lies and made me believe that Chris was cheating on me. On the other hand, Chris was not helping matters. There were days I could hear him speaking to somebody on the phone for hours and I wasn't happy with it. He always chatted late at night and sometimes I slept before him. We didn't usually go to bed together ever since he started going on business trips, but I discovered that he wasn't coming to bed early when he was around. I reached out to my friends and told them that what I told them during the trip had become a constant thing. I thought he was going to change if we spoke about it. My friends encouraged me to work it out with my husband or try discussing it with him and that maybe it was not what I thought it was. A month later, the calling and late-night chats were reduced. I was somewhat happy because I felt like I was getting my husband back. A part of me thought that maybe I was wrong all these while and things were gradually going back to normal and I felt relieved. One day, I was at home when my husband came home saying that he had a surprise trip for me for our upcoming 2-year anniversary. I was very happy about it because my husband acted like everything was now back to normal. Few days later, I started making plans for the trip. I even called my friends telling them about the trip and I was happy. I listened to them when they told me I was overacting. Unknown to me, they were also in on the surprise, but kept it a secret from me. The day we were to go on the trip came and I was more surprised. All along I thought it was only me and Chris, but I never knew that we were going with my friends and Matthew. I was very surprised to see them, but was also excited because it was going to be fun. We arrived at our destination and settled in. We were tired and we all went to bed to rest for the night. The following morning we all had breakfast together and Chris told us the activities he had planned out for that day. We all went sightseeing and took a lot of interesting pictures. At that point, I thought that the trip was bringing me and Chris together. The activities that Chris planned were fun and we all enjoyed ourselves. The day of our anniversary came and Chris had a lot planned out. We went out for dinner and I enjoyed myself a lot. We also exchanged gifts and we left for our hotel for some fresh air. At that point, it was unknown to me Chris had a surprise planned for me. It was an after party with our friends, so we all partied throughout the night and we had a lot to eat and drink. We all enjoyed ourselves and went to bed that evening when it was all over because it was a successful day. I woke up the following morning with a hangover and I knew I must have really drank a lot the previous night. When I turned to the other side of the bed, I couldn't find Chris. You guys needed to see how I overrated and wondered where he must have gone so early in the morning. I didn't think much about it because I thought he must be around somewhere. So, I got up to take a pill for my hangover. When I thought about the previous night, I felt happy about how our anniversary went. I was happy that my husband could go out of his way to surprise me and everything felt perfect. I got up and got dressed for the day. While I was about heading out, I heard a knock on the door and I was surprised because I wasn't expecting anyone. My husband could have literally opened the door if he was the one, so I went and opened the door only to find Matthew with a cup of coffee standing at the door. He told me good morning and said that the coffee will help me with the hangover. I needed it, so I collected the coffee and thanked him. He asked me if he could enter. I refused, but then he said he meant no harm and that he wanted to tell me something really important. I asked him what could be so important that he had to come to my room so early in the morning. He told me that he saw Chris going out early this morning. I didn't see anything wrong with that and I told Matthew that Chris probably went out to get something. He looked at me with self-pity and said that he saw Chris driving out with a lady. I couldn't believe what Matthew was telling me, so I closed the door and picked up my phone to call Chris, but his phone was switched off. I left the room hurriedly and went to tell my friends about what Matthew had just told me. I told them that Chris had gone back to the way he was behaving before, and I told them that Matthew told me that he left with a lady. I asked myself how he could just leave without telling me. It was supposed to be our anniversary trip and we were supposed to be together. I tried reaching out to him, but his lines were switched off. My friends told me that he probably left for an urgent purpose and that I shouldn't jump into conclusion. They also assumed that the lady was a coworker or a business partner. I didn't buy into what they were saying because at that time, I felt like my mind was made up. My suspicions were right. To even think he had to leave without even waking me up made me angry. My friends didn't understand what I was saying because they believed that Chris would not cheat on me and I shouldn't follow the ideas I was developing. I left and went to my room and kept trying my husband's line, but it switched off. At some point, I got tired and I slept off. In the evening, my friends came and tried to cheer me up. I tried sending them off because I wasn't interested in partying at that point. I checked my phone and saw that Chris hadn't called or returned any of my messages. I got much persuasion from them and they told me I needed to forget about what was happening and that I needed to enjoy my anniversary weekend. I finally agreed to go out with them. So we got dressed and we went to the club. On our way to the club, I kept thinking about how my husband could leave me alone on the trip he had planned for me without telling me about it. I felt disappointed that Chris could do that to me. It was our anniversary, so I believed all work should have been put on hold, right? I was deep in my own thoughts when one of my friends, Jackie, said I shouldn't think too much about it and I should just have fun. We got to the club and we ordered drinks, and for a long time since Chris left, I felt present in the moment. I was beginning to get myself back and gradually forget about all that happened. We danced in the club and I was very happy because I wasn't thinking about anything at that moment. After spending about a few hours in the club, Matthew joined us. I was surprised to see him because I thought it was a girls' night out. But Jackie said she invited him for drinks since he was the only one left at the hotel and Chris was left. I said hi to Matthew and he kept stealing glances at me, which I found weird. I decided to brush it off and enjoy myself. Not quite long, I saw Jackie talking to a guy. With the way she was giggling excitedly, I knew she had found someone she was going home with. At that point we were already tipsy and Jackie came and asked if Matthew could drive the rest of us back to the hotel since she was leaving with the guy she had just met. I felt a type of way because she just met the guy, but I knew Jackie was an independent lady. Jackie left with the guy and me and my friends danced for a couple of hours before leaving. At that point we were all drunk except Matthew. Maybe it was a conscious decision because I never saw him taking any drink. It was time to go and we were all drunk, so Matthew helped us to the car and he drove us down to the hotel. At that point I wasn't thinking about Chris or what he did to me, I was just in the moment. So, Matthew helped me and my friends to our rooms. On getting into my room I blacked out at some point and that was the only thing I could remember. The following morning I woke up to the sound of something crashing on the floor. I woke up immediately and I couldn't believe what I saw next. I stood up holding my head up because I had a massive headache. I had a lot to drink the previous night because I wanted to forget about what my husband did. I looked up to see what just happened and I found my husband standing right in front of where I slept with disgust in his eyes. Before I could grasp what was going on, I realized that I was naked. I turned to the other side of the bed to see Matthew sleeping next to me. Yes, guys, Matthew and I spent the night together. My husband couldn't look me in the eyes and he told me he was disappointed in me. He walked up to Matthew and started beating him. He kept asking Matthew how he could sleep with his wife when they were supposed to be best friends. Matthew was mute and didn't respond to any of Chris' questions. He had the look of satisfaction on his face and I could tell he wasn't remorseful about what he did. My husband turned to me and asked me why I cheated on him with his best friend. At that point I cried my eyes out. I told him that I didn't know that happened and that Matthew took advantage of me. He didn't listen to me and he left angrily. I fell to my knees and I kept thinking about what I did. At that point I told myself that my marriage was over. I cheated with my husband's best friend. Matthew tried to console me, but that really got me upset. I asked him why he did that to me. And why did he take advantage of me like that? Matthew looked at me and asked me if that wasn't what I wanted to do in the first place. I thought you were always being suspicious about Chris. He asked me. I made it clear that the fact that I was suspicious didn't mean I planned on cheating on him. I asked him to get out of my room. He left and I felt like my whole world had crumbled. I didn't know what to do at that moment, so I decided to call Jackie. I called Jackie crying on the phone and she came over 30 minutes later. I explained to her how Chris saw me and Matthew naked on the bed and how Chris reacted. I didn't even know what happened because I blacked out at some point. I felt like at that moment my marriage was over. I told her about Matthew's reaction and she said she was very disappointed in me. Jackie had always told me not to allow Matthew to mess with my head. But I guess I fell for it. We made arrangements and we left the hotel back to our house. We all left except Matthew. Since the incident happened, I haven't seen Matthew. He was less important to me at that moment because all I was thinking about was how to reconcile with my husband. My friends and I left the hotel and went back home. So guys, I never thought that the trip that was meant to celebrate our anniversary was the one that ruined my marriage. I ended up cheating on my husband with his best childhood friend. When I got back home, the house was locked and I was not able to enter the house. I knocked at the door for a while and after a few minutes, it opened. A woman opened the door and I tried entering, but she wouldn't allow me in. She then handed me some papers. When I checked it, it was divorce papers. I asked her who she was and what she was doing in my house. She told me she was the new housekeeper. I begged her to allow me inside, but she said she was given strict orders not to allow me in. I was stranded because I didn't have anywhere else to go. I tried calling Chris, but he wasn't picking up my calls. I asked her where Chris was, and she just said he wasn't around. I went through the divorce papers and I saw that Chris has already signed it. I was very sad, and so I decided to call my friend, Jackie, to come pick me up. After a few minutes, Jackie came and picked me up. We went to her house and I narrated my encounter with the new housekeeper, and she was surprised. She tried calming me down and said that I should try speaking to Chris before I take any step. That was 2 days ago, guys. My husband is still not speaking to me. For the past few days now, I have still not been able to reach out to my husband. I have been looking at the divorce papers and I don't know what to do. I can't even get hold of him because his lines were off. I later discovered that Chris had blocked me on all platforms. I decided to contact my sister Annie so she could help me talk to Chris in order for us to meet up for me to explain what had happened in the hotel. Annie told me that she would get back to me if she talked to my husband. My husband didn't allow me in. He only communicated with me through our family lawyer, and he said he didn't want to ever see me or have anything to do with me again. I begged the lawyer to help me talk to Chris, but he said that there was nothing left to talk about, that our marriage was already over. There's nothing more hurtful than never being able to find closure. Chris is really hurting me right now. There's nothing more hurtful than not being able to get closure in life. I can't believe that my husband is doing this to me. I know I'm wrong, and that's why I want to apologize to him and talk to him. Even if he still ends up divorcing me, I just want to talk to him for one last time. What dirt if revenge is this? This is worse than anything I could have imagined. I hate his silence more than anything, and the fact that he wants us to get a divorce without even seeing each other breaks my heart a lot. Chris knows me very well, and that's why he's doing this. He knows about my tendency to have anxiety. He knows how much I hate not clearing things up. If this is his firm revenge, then it is very cruel. I've not been myself because of this whole scenario. Update. Hi guys, I'm back here again. I'm not happy to be back here because I am still hurting and nothing has really changed. The thought of writing this broke me all over again. I just want to write this because I don't want to leave you guys hanging without having any closure at all. Chris has done the worst possible thing to me. The fact that I got divorced without seeing my husband after that trip is very triggering. Chris blocked all forms of communication and extensively made sure that we had no opportunity to speak or even say goodbye one last time. I'm wrong and I made a very big mistake, so I don't really fault him for divorcing me. But he could have given me a little bit of time with him at least. This is the man I once loved. I still need to ask him why he kept leaving me alone and why he left the trip with a lady. I still need to ask him if he kept leaving for work purposes or if there were other reasons. These are important questions that Chris still hasn't answered. This is the worst thing to ever do to anybody. I don't know if he cheated and if he was seeing someone else. I don't know if he didn't cheat. He just left me to guess everything. I signed the divorce papers, and 3 months ago, our marriage was dissolved. As a whole, I didn't have an opportunity to meet him and get things right. Nothing worked even after I tried. I didn't give up after the divorce. I still tried to go to his house and trash him, but all my efforts were still in vain. He kept ignoring me and making sure I couldn't enter the house. Even when I tried to come take my things before the divorce, I just found them outside the house. I couldn't even get into the house and do the packing myself. He even hired a housekeeper and seems to have moved on really fast. Matthew is another case that just gives me the ick. That guy gets on my nerves each time I think about him. I hate him with passion, and that's why I didn't let any of what happened go. I spoke to my lawyers and told them I wanted to take legal actions against him. I told them I was drunk that night and he should have known better rather than try to get under my pants. My lawyers reached out to his lawyers and a case was filed. His lawyers advised us to settle in court because I didn't really have evidence that I didn't consent. I pressed my lawyer not to settle, but he made me understand that without concrete evidence, I couldn't do a thing. We ended up settling and Matthew was ordered to pay for damages. I was not really content because what I really wanted was to see him getting punished and possibly arrested. I heard that Matthew is also trying to reach Chris, but he's also being locked out and I'm not the only one getting ignored. That gives me a little bit of comfort because it would hurt me more if I realize that I'm the only one being given the silent treatment. Chris is really wrong in that aspect because why does he feel it's okay to get mad and shut off all communication after he also decided to treat me badly? He's also at fault for leaving his wife alone on a trip he planned. Now he's punishing me but just ignoring me and not giving me a chance to clear things up. I guess our marriage was always headed for doom the moment he decided to let his best friend have control over us. I guess I'm divorced now, so I have to let the past go. Thank you all for following me on this journey. It ended here and I'm moving on. One of my cousins came to pick me up from Jackie's house. I'm not staying with her in England. I really needed the distance from everything.